Hello, friends. Thanks for joining me. And the title of today's podcast is You're Not Broken, You're in Survival Mode. What if your habits are just a trauma response in disguise? We often label ourselves as overthinkers who can't make a decision or people pleasers who are just too nice, but the reality is we're stuck in a trauma cycle. And we often mistake our behaviors as our basic personality, or that people pleasing and overthinking are believed to be a bad habit, and nothing could be further from the truth. The truth is, we're playing out old survival scripts. Our nervous system is tricking us into thinking that this is who we are, and here's the reality: they're not. These old scripts are simply a survival mechanism. We believe people-pleasing is a form of courteous personality, or we believe that overthinking is some cognitive solution to our problems. And no, this is a learned behavior, and it's to micromanage the body's reaction to perceived threats. And the crazy part is the perceived or real micro threats are continuous and come from our childhood. And they keep us stuck in this pattern of survival mode. And we often refer to these patterns as, I'm just too nice to other people and I always get hurt, or I just worry too much and I read too much into every conversation. And then the trauma cycle begins where we replay every conversation and imagine how we could have said things differently or make ourselves more likable. Or we obsessively think what others are thinking or feeling about us. And here's my personal favorite. We constantly scan our environment or social situations to look for threats. And while we think we're being efficient and thorough by constantly scanning our environment, we are fatiguing ourselves and creating more anxiety and being externally as opposed to internally focused on our core emotions. I'm going to talk more about core emotions and defenses later on in this video. When we're stuck in this trauma response, our nervous system elevates to a state of hyperarousal with one of the four trauma responses, such as fight, flight, freeze, or fawning response. And most importantly, people-pleasing and overthinking are each found in one of the four responses. So I'll go on more in depth here and discuss the traits of people-pleasing and overthinking as it relates to trauma. So let's start out with the fight response, which most of us are familiar with. As you may have suspected, the fight response is indicative of angry outbursts and explosive behaviors, bullying behaviors, and best yet, narcissistic and controlling behaviors. And now I know some of you might be asking, narcissistic behaviors are in the fight response? And the answer is yes. And for just a quick note here, I'll be going over narcissism as it relates to trauma in the future videos, so subscribe and be looking for it. And the second trauma response is the flight response, and example behaviors are panic and extreme anxiety behaviors, perfectionistic or obsessive-compulsive tendencies, workaholic traits, and last but not least, the overthinker. Surprise, surprise. So we'll talk a little bit about the traits of overthinkers since this is one of our behaviors we're emphasizing today. So here are the traits of overthinkers. Overthinkers tend to be high achievers, and their core fears are fear of making a mistake, fear of rejection, and fear of disappointing others. Overthinking is clearly a way of avoiding our true feelings. When this happens, overthinkers overanalyze as well as ruminate, which lowers self-trust, increases anxiety significantly, and blocks our intuitive or cognitive capacity, which impairs our decision-making. So the next and third trauma response is easily understood by its name. It's the freeze response, which is characterized by isolating oneself, feeling stuck, and difficulty making decisions. Now remember, we're not going to be talking much about the freeze response or the fight response because we're emphasizing the flight response where we find the overthinkers and people pleasers who are in, you guessed it, the fawn response, which is the fourth and final trauma response we'll discuss today. And the fawn response behaviors are marked by, yes, the people pleaser. And by the way, the term fawn here is used to mean excessive flattery or attention to another person. And wow, that sure sounds like a people pleaser to me. And additionally, fawn response behaviors are marked by poor boundaries and codependent behaviors. So let's talk a little bit about the traits of the people pleasers. People pleasers are highly emotionally intelligent people, and remember, overthinkers are high achievers. People pleasing, like other defenses, impairs our authenticity. Our brain gets rewired and prioritizes safety over finding our true identity. So instead of validating ourselves and looking at our own needs, we're stuck in a mode of, what can I do to keep the peace? Consequently, and unfortunately, we lose our true sense of self and are subject to every whim or threat that comes along in life. So what happens physiologically with all of these different types of trauma responses? And I'll give you an example of the defensive trauma cycle first. First, we overthink or people please, which suppresses our true needs. Then we overthink or people please again to avoid the guilt and the shame. And we feel resentful and we judge ourselves. And then we overthink and people please again. What a vicious cycle. So, the physiological response to the trauma cycle by overthinking or people pleasing and the effect on the limbic system of the emotional suppression is focused essentially on two main parts of the limbic system, and the first is the hippocampus. So, here are three main functions of the hippocampus. It's critical for memory formation, emotional regulation, and contextualizing emotional experiences. So, I'm going to give you an example of an emotional contextualization here. Let's imagine when you were younger, as we all were, maybe you were in college, and you were going to a concert with one of your friends to see this band that you couldn't wait to see. You get there, you're with your group of friends, you get in the middle of the concert, and they play the song, your favorite song you've all been waiting for. You're all singing together, having a great time, and it's just a memorable occasion. Now let's fast forward 15 years. Maybe you're done, you're mid career or wherever you are, and you're driving down the highway and you have the radio on, and that song comes on. And automatically, you're transported back in time with all of these feelings and memories, and you're put right back in the concert again. Emotional contextualization. Also, the hippocampus integrates emotional information with memories and helps with memory recall. And it additionally regulates the stress response and how much cortisol, which is a stress hormone, our body produces. And the effect or impact of this emotional suppression to the hippocampus is reduced hippocampal activity and volume through chronic emotional suppression. Yes, the hippocampus literally shrinks. And additionally, there is impaired memory consolidation with the hippocampus, along with inhibited emotional contextualization. Remember, we discussed that just a few minutes ago. And unfortunately, the consequences of this are memory difficulty, recalling details of emotionally charged events, and here's the one that I think's more important: increased risk of high anxiety or post-traumatic stress disorder. And the second part of the limbic system is the amygdala. And the amygdala processes emotions, mostly fear and anxiety, and triggers the body's stress response. And the impact of emotional suppression on the amygdala is it heightens amygdala activity or hyperactivity, and unprocessed emotions begin to backlog and are perceived as ongoing threats. This creates a feedback loop where the amygdala remains in a state of hyperarousal. Additionally, emotional suppression of the amygdala also creates a weakened prefrontal regulation. This suppression literally overtaxes your amygdala and impairs your thought processes. Remember, your prefrontal cortex involves your thought processes. And the consequences of this overactivity in the amygdala: increased anxiety, irritability, or emotional reactivity due to unprocessed emotions. Along with a heightened sensitivity to perceived threats, what reinforces the hypervigilance and maladaptive defenses is the overthinking, remember, which is the flight mode, or the people-pleasing, which is the fawning mode. When we become anxious, blood is shifted away from our frontal and prefrontal areas of our brain, and we lose our ability to think rationally. Consequently, our emotions are meant to process or move through our body, and they're becoming physiologically stuck. So, by suppressing our emotions, our nervous system isn't able to work off the excess emotional energy. We become stuck in a survival mode, which keeps us stuck in a hypervigilant mode, searching for real or perceived threats. And in order to heal, we have to move from our defensive mode past our tertiary or superficial emotions to our basic or core emotions and become more of our authentic self. I'll define the hierarchy of emotional states, which is a three-part process. First are your defenses, which are anything we do to avoid feelings, such as intellectualizing, denial, overthinking, or people-pleasing, to name a few. And the second, and they're a little closer to your feelings, but they're not true feelings, are our tertiary or superficial emotions, which are typically anxiety, guilt, or shame, which are still not our core feelings. Examples of our core feelings are things like joy, fear, excitement, and sadness, just to name a few. So, hence, our defenses like people-pleasing and overthinking, which are forms of emotional suppression, trigger maladaptive defensive circuits in our brain and blocks our core emotions. So, how do we deal with people-pleasing or overthinking types of defensive behaviors? I use a three-step process here, and it's patience, compassion, and curiosity. First, be patient and try to name the behavior you're experiencing at that moment. If you're overthinking, tell yourself, I'm overthinking about something right now, and literally name the thought you're overthinking about. Or, I'm having a people-pleasing thought, and name the people-pleasing thought. Naming creates some emotional distance and engages your neocortex and cognitive processes, which begins to restore the blood flow to the prefrontal part of your brain, or your thought processes. So in effect, the thinking part of our brain can work together with our limbic system or emotional part of our brain to begin reducing our trauma response. Second, be compassionate with yourself and allow your thoughts to occur. Shift your attention to your hands or your feet. Try to notice any unusual situations like numbness or tingling or pressure in your body. Doing this will interrupt the brain's default mode or autonomic response, which could trigger the fight, flight, freeze, or fawn mode we discussed earlier. While engaged in this process of patience and compassion, give yourself at least a couple of minutes. Research has shown that allowing this amount of time will permit the emotions in your body to begin to neurochemically dissipate. And engage in some form of regulated breathing while allowing the trauma response to pass. Third, be curious about your thoughts and feelings and what might be going on. Instead of focusing on what is going on around you or what others are thinking about, ask yourself, what am I feeling right now? Or what past behavior or scenario does this remind me of? Or what am I needing at this moment? This builds a healthier identity and an authentic self through more genuine experiences. By doing this, we can begin to say no to destructive behaviors. We can be truthful with ourselves even if it's uncomfortable. We can resist over-pleasing or over-explaining ourselves. Every time we repeat this process, we are signaling to our emotional selves that it's okay to act in authentic ways. We're giving ourselves permission to not be self-destructive. When we stop hiding from our true feelings, our thoughts and feelings become much calmer. Our decision-making process becomes much more clear and efficient. Hence, our productivity improves significantly, and our nervous system becomes much more stable. So in summary, this process is basically permission to feel and sort out healthy and unhealthy emotions and behaviors we might be experiencing. It also can be used to create a space for meeting our needs in healthy and authentic ways, and it helps us stop acting and living vicariously through others in hopes of getting our needs met. And remember, not everything that weighs you down is yours to carry. Grace and peace unto you. I'm Dr. Lee.